Whiskey spilled across the table. Glass shattered on the concrete floor, and a single sheet of paper drifted down beside it. 2 lines, printed in black ink. Executor, Robert Ellison. Beneficiary, none. That was the moment my son realized. The world he had ruled for 10 years had just turned to ash. My name is Robert Ellison, 63 years old, former aerospace engineer, vidover, resident of Boulder, Colorado. I live in what used to be my garage, now a workshop, filled with the smell of paint, glue, and aluminum dust. People around here call it the memory box. I call it the only place left where I can still breathe. I once designed aircraft for the Air Force, then co-founded Ellison Development Group with my wife Margaret, a real estate company that grew from one blueprint to an empire worth more than $200 million. It was our pride, our legacy, until one wrong signature hers brought everything down. I took the blame, walked away, let her and our son keep the company. I thought silence would save her reputation. Instead, that silence erased my name. For 14 years, no one called me Mr. Ellison anymore. I became that old man in the garage, the one who built toy planes while his real world collapsed. A morning in May, 2025, the sun had barely touched the Rockies when my phone began to vibrate. Unknown number. But I knew that voice before I even answered, because sometimes coldness travels faster than sound. "Dad," he said, "Mom's gone. You should come for the reading of the will, but don't expect anything." It was Derek, my son, 38 now, CFO of EDG, the company I built, the company he inherited. His tone was flat, deliberate, no sadness, no hesitation, just a verdict being read aloud. Before hanging up, he added, his voice curling into a smile I could almost hear, "If you need gas money, I can send you $15. A silence followed, thick and airless. Then the dull, endless buzz of a disconnected line. I set the phone down. The whiskey in my glass trembled with my pulse. I took a slow sip. It burned all the way down, leaving the taste of iron and regret. $15. That was the price of fatherhood. 38 years of sacrifice, reduced to pocket change. I typed a single reply. "Keep it. You'll need it to buy respect." The message sent. I didn't wait for a response. Silence and we had an old agreement. But this time, that silence wasn't surrender. It was a beginning. I turned toward the wall. An old photograph still hung there. 3 people, smiling in front of a small model home. Me, Margaret, Derek. Her handwriting was etched on the frame. The family that builds together. Now, it looked less like a blessing and more like an accusation. They built with money. I built with silence. I still kept the habits of an engineer, recording every plan, every failure, every debt unpaid. I opened a weathered notebook. The last entry, dated 2011, held only 3 words written in pencil. Skyline, silence, debt. The paper smelled faintly of glue and time. I traced the words with my thumb, as if the grooves themselves still remembered the day I stopped being someone worth naming. Outside the window, Boulder was alive and peaceful. People walking their dogs, children racing on bicycles, someone laughing in the distance. And there I was, a man existing in a different timeline, where the wounds never healed. They just learned to bleed quietly. Margaret was gone. I didn't cry, maybe because I'd already mourned her. The day she signed the divorce papers, without looking back. For years, I told myself I'd never return to Denver. But Derek had just given me a reason. When I was young, my father told me something that never left. You can lose everything, son, but if you let others write your story, you lose your soul. I'd stayed silent for 14 years. Maybe it was time to take my story back. I cleared the table, wiped away the whiskey stain. Sunlight cut across the wood, splitting my reflection in 2. Half light, half shadow. Exactly how I'd lived all these years. I pulled a wooden box from under the workbench. Inside were the last relics of EDG. A silver pen engraved with my name, the original blueprint of the Skyline Towers, and a sealed envelope from Grant and Myers Law, dated 2011. The signature at the bottom read Thomas Grant, my old friend, and one of the few who hadn't forgotten I once existed. I placed my hand on the envelope, didn't open it, just said quietly, "Maybe it's time." The morning light glinted off the unfinished model plane beside me. I spun its small propeller with my finger. It turned once, twice, then stopped. Time behaves the same way. It only stops when you decide to face it. It may sound strange, but I've learned that to bring back the truth, you don't need to shout. You just wait long enough for the liars to expose themselves. That will reading. It wouldn't just be a farewell to a woman I once loved. It would be a trial for a lifetime of silence. I grabbed my jacket and car keys. Before leaving, I looked around the workshop one last time, at the dust, the blueprints, the ghosts. Then my eyes stopped on the family photo again. Margaret's words beneath the glass. The family that builds together. They used to sound proud. Now they sounded hollow. Outside, the wind rolled down from the Rockies, sharp, cold, but clean. I breathed it in. It cut through my chest like truth, after too many lies. Dark clouds were gathering in the east, right above Denver. I looked at them and almost smiled. $15, huh, Derek? Let's see how you handle real debt. I started the car. The garage door lifted, flooding the room with light. The past stayed behind, but its echo followed me out onto the road. As I drove away, the voice in my head was calm, measured. Not angry, not bitter, just awake. They say silence is weakness. They're wrong. Silence is when you no longer need to raise your voice, because the truth will do it for you. The wind rose, the road narrowed, and as Boulder disappeared in the rearview mirror, I realized the story I'd buried 14 years ago was waiting for me in Denver. And this time, I wasn't coming back quietly. Morning came quietly. Boulder lay still under a steel-gray sky. The air was cold enough to slip through the cracks of the garage window and crawl across the floor. I woke before sunrise and cleaned the workbench. The model airplane I'd left unfinished from the night before sat there, the left wing streaked with dried paint, a wound that had never quite closed. I touched it lightly, not to fix it, but to remind myself that some things are better left broken. I packed a few clothes, a couple of old tools, and the silver-framed family photo that had survived more than the marriage it once celebrated. On the table sat a small, unopened envelope, the letter from Grant and Myers Law, untouched for years. I almost left it behind, then paused. Silence filled the room. I slipped it into my coat pocket. 3 knocks echoed at the door. Even, steady, familiar. I didn't need to ask who it was. Carol Myers, 59, my neighbor for more than a decade. Widowed, taught piano to neighborhood kids, and walked every morning past my house with a cup of coffee in hand. She stood on the porch, holding a box of warm apple pie. "I heard you're leaving town," she said. I nodded, my voice rough. "Denver. There's an old story I need to hear again, this time, properly." She looked at me for a long moment, eyes filled with quiet worry. "You're really going then?" "Yes," I said. "Not for the money, just to hear the truth." She set the pie down on the table and sat on the porch step beside me. The wind brushed her hair across her face. "Denver's a cold place," she said softly, "especially when people start talking about money." I let out a dry laugh. "Colder than here, maybe. In Boulder, people pretend to forget. In Denver, they just pretend to care." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "If you find yourself too alone out there," she said, "remember, not everyone stopped believing in you." I looked across the street where the early sun was spilling down the Rockies, turning the ridges into rivers of gold. "Thank you, Carol," I said quietly. She nodded. "No need to thank me, Robert. Just make sure you come back alive." I didn't promise. I only nodded. By noon, I was standing at the bus terminal. The silver coach hissed as its doors opened, a rush of diesel and cold air mixing into something oddly familiar. I took a seat in the very back, a habit left from years of not trusting anyone enough to sit in front. From there, I could see both the road ahead and the faces behind. The engine roared to life. The wheels turned slowly, then steadied as the city began to fade. Through the window, Boulder shrank. The quiet houses, the trees, and finally, the little garage disappearing in the mirror. I whispered under my breath, as if speaking to someone who might still be listening. "Let's begin again, Margaret." The bus climbed onto the I-70 eastbound. Outside, rain began to fall. Thin, gray lines crawling down the glass like memories refusing to fade. I watched the droplets race each other down the window, and in that motion, the past returned. Year 2011. The boardroom of Ellison Development Group. Polished oak table. Warm lights above. Faces I once trusted sitting around it. On the screen, the blueprint of the Skyline Towers project. The project meant to make EDG a national name. The same project that destroyed my career. That day, I'd found a discrepancy in the financial report. One number altered, one account quietly rerouted. $5 million gone, redirected to a shell company. I'd asked Margaret, Did you know about this? She didn't look at me. Her answer was a whisper. I'll take care of it. 3 days later, the headlines read, Ellison Group under investigation for investment fraud. The board demanded accountability. Someone to blame. And when I stood up, Margaret said nothing. Not even my name. I thought I was protecting her, protecting our company, protecting Derek. But as I walked out of that building, I understood the truth. I hadn't protected anyone. I'd erased myself from the very family I'd built. The memory faded. The present returned. Outside, the rain had stopped. The asphalt shimmered like molten steel under the late sun. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was short. There will be press at the will reading. Don't embarrass the family. I stared at it for a few seconds, then smiled, the kind of smile no one wants to see. I was humiliated a long time ago, I murmured. If anyone had been close enough to hear, they would have known. It wasn't the voice of a broken man. It was the sound of a debt collector, about to make his first call. The bus stopped halfway through the mountain pass. An elderly man stepped on, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. He sat beside me, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. Headed to Denver? He asked. I nodded. For a funeral. He smiled sadly. So am I. People die, but secrets don't. I turned toward him. There was something in his eyes I recognized. That tired kind of peace only people with long regrets carry. People die, but secrets don't. His words lingered long after he stopped speaking. The bus climbed higher. Fog swallowed the view. In the glass beside me, I caught my own reflection. Older than I remembered, hair more silver than gray, but the fire still there, waiting. Fire doesn't always burn. Sometimes it waits for the right wind. I thought of my father's voice, echoing from a lifetime ago. You can't teach someone about honor, son. You can only show them how you hold it. And I thought of Derek, the boy who once wanted to be like me, who now spent his life erasing me from every document he could find. When he was little, I told him, building something is easy. Keeping it standing, that's the hard part. He would learn that lesson soon, but not the way I wanted him to. Outside, snow began to fall. Thin at first, then thicker. Soft flakes brushing against the glass like ghosts of old apologies. The bus moved slower, climbing through the pass. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the old envelope. The paper had yellowed, but the handwriting was still the same. Thomas Grant. I opened it for the first time in 14 years. Inside was a single page. His handwriting, steady and precise. Robert, if the day ever comes when you need to tell your side of the story, I'll be here. Below it, a phone number. Still the same. I smiled, quietly. Maybe destiny is just a meeting that got delayed too long. They say time heals everything. It doesn't. Time just teaches pain how to stay quiet. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the rhythm of the engine blend with the sound of the wind. In that moment, I knew. This journey wasn't about reclaiming money. It was about proving that truth can't be buried under wealth. Through the fogged window, the camera would see it. The bus winding down the slope, the white of the Rockies, turning to silver under a pale sun. Robert Ellison's face reflected in the glass. Half light, half shadow. The past never stays buried. It only sleeps. Until someone says its name the right way. The engine roared. The mountains faded behind. And the road stretched east. Toward Denver. Toward the truth. Toward the reckoning that had been waiting 14 years. Denver. The city of glass, steel, and lies wrapped in suits. I arrived under a heavy gray sky, the kind of morning light that lets people see each other clearly, but never quite truthfully. The Grant and Myers building rose from the center of downtown, floor-to-ceiling glass reflecting the skyline like a mirror that refused to tell the truth. As the revolving doors spun open, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with new paper, the smell of money and guilt trying to hide behind it. I used to belong to this world. Now, I was just a visitor. The young receptionist looked up, her blonde hair pinned into a perfect knot. Mr. Ellison? I nodded once. Mr. Grant is expecting you. The elevator doors closed around me. In the mirrored walls, my reflection stared back colder. Older. A man who had already lost everything worth losing. Each floor that passed seemed to lift another layer of memory. Press conferences, shareholders' dinners, hollow congratulations, and smiles that cost more than they meant. The only thing real had been the crack that never healed, the one between Margaret and me. When the doors opened, Thomas Grant stood waiting, coffee in hand, eyes kind but tired. The way people look when they've seen too many lies and learned to forgive too few. Robert, he said softly. Just my name, but inside it, a decade of absence. I nodded. Been a long time. He studied me for a beat, then sighed. Derek's already here, brought a camera crew. A corner of my mouth lifted half a smile, half a scar. Of course he did. Derek's always loved an audience. The conference room smelled like polished wood and quiet hostility. At the center, a long table gleamed under the white lights, the red seal of the will folder still unbroken. The air itself felt heavy as if it knew what was coming. At the far end sat Derek Ellison, gray suit, black tie, Rolex flashing when he moved. Beside him was Lena Hart, 32. EDG's communications director, sharp eyes, practiced smile. On Derek's other side, Evan Brooks, 45, legal advisor, once my right hand, now someone else's shadow. A small camera stood on a tripod, the red light blinking, recording everything. Because Derek never did anything without an audience, he looked up, lips curving into that smirk he'd perfected in boardrooms. Well, look who finally showed up, he said. Didn't think you'd actually have the nerve to come. I met his gaze, voice steady. I'm here to listen, not to speak. He turned toward the camera, addressing it like a press conference. Everyone, this is the man who destroyed Ellison Development Group and nearly sent my mother to prison. His words landed sharp in the quiet room. Every syllable measured for the recording. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Sometimes, silence is the only way to let someone hear how loud their lies sound. Thomas set down his coffee, his tone shifting to command. If everyone's ready, he said, we'll begin. The camera pivoted slightly toward me, the reflection of its red light flickering in my eyes cold, flat, unblinking. Thomas's voice filled the room. This is the last will and testament of Margaret Ellison, executed April 4th, 2024, Aspen, Colorado. Each word echoed off the walls, like the tick of a clock counting down. The light above the table was harsh too white, washing color from everything, making the room feel less like an office and more like a morgue. Derek leaned back, whispering just loud enough for everyone to hear. Here comes the good part. Thomas continued reading. I, Margaret Ellison, being of sound mind and legal capacity, hereby bequeath all my property, including my shares of Ellison Development Group, all real estate holdings and trust accounts, to my son, Derek Ellison. Number. Me. Numb. The words dropped like stones in water. For a second, no one breathed. Then the sound of camera shutters filled the air. A photographer in the corner invited, obviously, by Derek himself. Derek smiled wide, his teeth glinting in the artificial light. That, he said, is justice. The words came out soft, but they cut through the room like a blade. Lena reached over, touched his shoulder. Evan chuckled nervously, eyes darting between us. The laugh of a man who didn't know which side would burn first. I didn't move, didn't blink. My hands rested flat on the table, steady as stone. In front of me, the document lay open, the ink still dark, the name Derek Ellison, written in Margaret's sharp handwriting. I'd know that script anywhere. Margaret always wrote like she was fighting against time. Thomas hesitated, looking up from the page. His eyes found mine. A silent message. Wait. It's not over. But Derek didn't notice. He was too busy basking in his own victory, turning again toward the camera. This proves, he said, that my mother trusted me, not the man who abandoned her 14 years ago. I stayed silent. But in my head, my own voice answered calm, cold. You're wrong, Derek. Your mother never trusted anyone, not even herself. Thomas folded the page and placed it carefully on the table. That concludes the first section, he said. But there's also an attached addendum, which we'll review once I verify the signatures and witnesses. Derek stretched, arrogance dripping from every gesture. Let me guess, he said. Some charity clauses. We can skip those, right? Thomas straightened, his tone hardening. No, we cannot. In law, there's no such thing as skipping. Something shifted in the air. The energy in the room turned dense, like static before lightning strikes. The camera kept recording, its quiet mechanical hum cutting through the silence. My pulse was steady, slow, the kind of calm that comes right before the storm. I leaned back, voiceover sliding into the moment. Every time a man believes he's already won, that's when the real losing begins. Because true victory never makes a sound. The overhead lights caught the reflections of 4 faces on the polished table. Derek arrogant, Lena calculating, Evan uneasy, and me still as stone. Outside, Denver's sky turned to lead. Wind slammed against the glass walls, howling like a warning. Thomas checked his watch. "We'll reconvene in 10 minutes," he said. "I need to confirm the witness certification." The tension broke, but only slightly. Chairs creaked. The camera light kept blinking. Derek leaned forward, his smile fixed, rehearsed. "Well, Father," he said, "that clear enough for you?" I met his gaze, no anger, no pity. Just a calm he couldn't understand. "Crystal," I said quietly. "But remember, son, some papers aren't meant to be read all the way through." Thomas resealed the envelope, the sharp click of the lock echoing through the room. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes sticking to the glass, melting into silver streaks. Justice never comes early. It arrives only when someone grows arrogant enough to believe they'll never need it. The camera light flickered once, then stopped. The sound faded under the hum of the city. And for the first time that day, I felt the storm begin to turn. They say when people think the play is over, that's when Act 2 begins. And inside that room, every breath suddenly became expensive. Thomas Grant sat down again, removed his glasses, and wiped them slowly with a white handkerchief. A gesture of a man who's watched too many collapses and still manages to look calm while doing it. He opened the second folder, his voice steady and low, like the tap of a judge's gavel. "The next section," he said, "lists the individuals to whom Margaret Ellison left small personal gifts." The room went dead silent. The camera light stayed red, its reflection slicing thin lines of light across every face at the table. Thomas began to read. "Helen Parker, housekeeper of the Ellison family, $50,000. A soft gasp came from the corner. Derek turned toward Lena with a crooked smile. "Well, that's fair. The maid earns more from my mother's will than most of my senior managers make in a year." Thomas didn't reply. He simply turned the page. "Jimmy Rhodes, personal driver, $25,000. I remembered Jimmy, a small man with a crooked back who drove Derek to school every morning. Once, he'd told me, I drive because I'm not smart enough to be an engineer, but smart enough to know who's sitting behind me." At the time, I'd laughed. Now, it felt prophetic. Thomas continued. "Scholarship fund for women in engineering, $100,000. Still, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the quiet scratch of a fountain pen and the tick of the wall clock, the heartbeat of a room pretending to stay calm. Then Thomas's tone shifted, a faint gravity tightening around each word. Evan Brooks, legal advisor of Ellison Development Group. Evan straightened in his chair, adjusted his tie, and smiled. "Is to receive $5,000 and a note to relearn professional ethics." Laughter broke out. Short, sharp, cold. Then it stopped, because I wasn't laughing. No one looked at Evan. His face had gone pale, the fake smile frozen in place. He forced out a dry chuckle. "Well, she always did have a sense of humor," Thomas replied without missing a beat. "No, Evan. She knew exactly what she was writing." Evan's jaw clenched. His hands tightened until his knuckles turned white. For a moment, he looked like a caged animal, suddenly forced to see itself in the glass. Thomas turned another page. His voice dropped, quieter now, as if bracing for the next blow. "Lena Hart, Communications Director of EDG." Lena tilted her head slightly, smiling for the camera as if she'd practiced the moment. "Is to receive one faux leather handbag, to replace the one she once switched." The whisper hit the room like wind through broken glass. Lena flinched. Color drained from her face. Derek turned sharply toward her. "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" Thomas set the page down, his voice crisp, surgical. "There is a notarized statement confirming that Mrs. Ellison was of full mental capacity when she signed." Lena's lips parted, but Derek cut her off, slamming a hand on the table. "Is this a joke? Is this some public humiliation act?" Thomas looked up calm, cold, unblinking. "No one's being humiliated, Derek. We're simply reading what your mother left behind." The words hit like a block of ice dropped in the middle of the room. No one breathed. Lena's hands trembled. For the first time, her eyes darted away. Maybe she finally understood. Money can buy almost everything, except the memory of the dying. Margaret hadn't forgotten. She'd just waited for the right moment to speak. Derek turned toward me, his voice cracking under the weight of anger. "You knew about this, didn't you? You and Mother planned this together." I met his gaze steady, quiet. "No, Derek, but I knew your mother better than you ever tried to." Thomas walked slowly around the table, placing a sealed envelope in front of each of them. These are certified copies of the will. Sign the acknowledgement form before you leave. Even sat rigid. Lena said nothing. Derek didn't even touch his envelope. I'm not signing anything, he snapped. Not until I know how long this farce is going to drag on. Thomas's eyes sharpened. If you believe this is a farce, remember, your mother never joked about her work or her honor. Silence. Only the soft hum of the camera filled the space. The red light blinked, steady, merciless. Derek frowned, glancing toward the back of the room. Wait, who let you in here? A reporter stepped forward from the corner, camera shaking slightly in his hands. I was invited by Mr. Ellison. Derek swung toward Thomas, furious. You invited the press? Thomas's reply was calm, even colder than before. No, Derek. Your mother's son did. The air froze. Evan looked down. Lena took a step back. And Derek, his face flushed red, eyes blazing. Impossibly. She would never humiliate her own family like this. Thomas answered quietly. Maybe she just wanted people to hear her truth, before someone else had the chance to rewrite it. I looked around the room, at all the faces that once surrounded Margaret, ate at her table, signed her contracts. Now, they looked like ghosts caught under too much light. I didn't speak, but in my mind, one sentence echoed. When truth walks in, honor is always the first to leave. Derek exhaled hard, fury cracking his voice. I'll sue. I'll shut this entire office down. Thomas didn't flinch. He simply looked at him, tone grave and deliberate. You could try, but the law doesn't fear the wealthy, Derek. It fears the ignorant, those who can't tell when they're wrong. The camera's red light blinked once more. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass, and for a moment, the room no longer felt like an office. It felt like a battlefield. No blood, no smoke, just paper, signatures, and one man patient enough to let the truth arrive on its own time. Some rooms don't need blood to become battlefields. Just a single document, a single signature, and someone patient enough to wait for the truth. Outside, Denver glowed under thin rain, the city lights bleeding across the glass. Beautiful, cold, and no longer trustworthy. Every room has that one moment, the one where no one dares to breathe. For this room, that moment arrived when Thomas Grant opened the final envelope. He rose from his chair, broke the red seal, and spoke in that slow, measured tone of his, the kind you hear right before a verdict. The next section, he said, addresses the principal heir. Derek leaned back, arms crossed, wearing that confident half-smile, the kind of grin men wear when they don't realize they're sitting on a landmine. The camera's red light stayed on, reflecting off his polished skin, his cold eyes gleaming with ambition like cut metal. Thomas glanced at me just for a second, but it was enough. Be ready, his eyes said. I nodded. Then silence. He began to read. To my son, Derek Ellison, I leave the remainder of my estate, approximately $200 million, including corporate shares, real estate, and trust accounts. Derek's lips curved upward. Lena exhaled softly. Evan shut his eyes, the tension draining from his shoulders. For a moment, the only sound in the room was paper shifting, and the offbeat rhythm of 3 hearts calming down. Then Thomas continued, his tone lowering, the way a man speaks when he's about to change the entire story. However, all assets shall be held and managed by the executor of the estate, Robert Ellison, until such time as they are released under the attached conditions. The air broke apart. Derek shot up from his chair. It slammed into the wall behind him with a crash. Executor? His voice cracked like glass. My father? Are you joking? Thomas didn't even look up. He simply kept reading. The person I have chosen to guard and protect this legacy is the one who once built it. Only the one who built it can ever have the courage to open it again. The room froze. Lena's eyes widened. Evan's mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't move. My hands rested on the cold table, the light from the ceiling trembling across the surface of my coffee cup. Derek's voice came out rough, hoarse, unsteady. No, this is a setup, your setup, Thomas. You and my father, you forged this to steal what's mine. Thomas's tone stayed perfectly calm. Be careful with your accusations, Derek. Every document has been witnessed, signed, and notarized. Your mother was fully competent. Derek laughed a hard, desperate laugh. Competent? She was in a hospital bed for 2 months. How lucid could she possibly have been? Thomas's voice dropped, heavy as iron. Lucid enough to know who deserved her trust. I looked at my son. He was trembling, not with rage, but with the fear that comes when power slips through your fingers. I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow ache, like watching a child drop the very soul he'd been given. Men don't fall because they lose money. They fall when they realize money was never what kept them standing. Derek slammed both hands on the table, pointing straight at me. You did this. You turned her against me. I answered quietly, steady, level, without heat. No, Derek. She changed her mind because, for once, she looked back and saw clearly. Shut up! He screamed, hitting the table hard enough to tip a glass of water. Water spilled across the documents, staining the notary seals, smudging the ink. Thomas reached forward quickly, steady hand over the page. You just damaged the original, Derek. Do you even realize what you're doing? Derek's breath came fast, his eyes bloodshot. Yeah, I do. I'm not signing a damn thing. Thomas stood tall, his words sharp enough to slice the tension. Then perhaps you should listen to the addendum before deciding. Silence swallowed the room. The overhead lights flickered, their reflections glinting off the table like blades waiting to fall. Outside, the rain started to thicken, the first drops hitting the glass in rhythmic bursts. Evan bent to gather loose papers. Maybe we should take a break, he muttered. Thomas raised a hand. No, we continue. He drew a smaller envelope from the folder, pale yellow, edges worn, signature intact. This, he said, is the addendum signed the same day, with 2 witnesses and a physician's certification of mental clarity. Derek stood motionless, fists clenched, his shoulders trembling. Lena looked at him, forcing a smile that wouldn't come. Thomas glanced in my direction, and in that moment, my inner voice rose, quiet, measured, absolute. When justice decides to speak, it always begins in absolute silence. Thomas resumed reading. In the event that my son, Derek Ellison, fails to demonstrate moral integrity and responsible conduct, all assets shall remain under the sole management of the executor of the estate, Robert Ellison, until such time as he proves genuine change of character. Someone exhaled. It might have been me. It might have been the room itself. Then Derek laughed harsh, hollow, cracking at the edges. Change of character? What is this, some sentimental movie script? Thomas met his eyes. No, Derek. It's the handwriting of a woman who watched too many people sell their souls to the company she built. Evan pushed his chair back quietly. Lena stared at the floor. Outside, the rain turned violent. A percussive rhythm against the glass, like drums announcing a storm. Derek turned toward me, eyes burning, voice shaking. If you think I'll let you touch that company again, you're out of your mind. I'll sue. I'll overturn every line of that will. I looked straight at him, calm, heavy, deliberate. You can bend the law, son, but you can't bend the truth. Thomas checked his watch. We'll take a 10-minute recess before proceeding to the final section. But Derek didn't sit. He just stood there, his shoulders tight, his gaze unfocused, the camera light still blinking red beside him. In the corner, the journalist tried not to move, but his lens caught everything. A man watching his empire fracture in his own hands. Justice has no scent, but when it finally arrives, the air always carries something unmistakable. The smell of iron, of rain, and of fear. Derek stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, the reflection of the lights burning in his eyes like fire. Thomas placed the yellow envelope back on the table, the sound sharp, final. I sat still, my hands folded. Some sons never understand. I whispered to myself that parents don't leave inheritance to be thanked for it. They leave it to see whether, when everything's gone, their child still remembers how to be human. Outside, Denver's rain came down harder, each drop tracing slow, silver lines across the glass, like time washing clean a name that once had been defiled. The past never dies. It just waits for a chance to come back, to remind you who buried it. When Thomas read the word addendum, I stopped hearing his voice. The sounds in that Denver office faded, only the rain tapping on glass, and my own voice echoing from 15 years ago, the voice of 2010, the night I signed my own sentence. Denver, 2010. I was 48, still strong, still confident, still foolish enough to believe that justice had a shape you could see. Ellison Development Group was at its peak. We'd just been named the top real estate developer in the Western states. Skyline Towers, my dream project. was days away from breaking ground. I believed it would be my legacy, something Derek could one day point to and say, "My father built that." But every legacy comes with a price. It was a cold March morning when I got the call. An emergency board meeting. Conference room. 32nd floor glass walls. White light so bright it burned the truth out of every shadow. On the table, a folder marked in red ink, Irregularity Skyline Fund. I opened it, and within 5 minutes I knew someone had changed the numbers. $5 million gone, moved through a shell account, and the signature at the bottom of the approval form? Margaret Ellison. I looked at her, my wife, the CEO, calm, composed, adjusting her collar like it was any other day. "Robert," she said softly, "let me handle this. I know what to do." But I knew what handle meant. It meant bury. And in the world of finance, once you start burying things, you never stop digging graves. That afternoon, I called Derek to my office. He was 23, fresh out of business school, eager, proud, hungry to be Robert Ellison's son. I wanted to tell him the truth, but I didn't, because I knew if I did, he would hate his mother for the rest of his life. So I stayed silent, one more time, and that silence was the most expensive thing I ever paid for. A week later, the investigation began. The papers called it the biggest fraud case in Colorado's history. Investors fled, stock plummeted, and during the emergency board session, Margaret stood up, her voice calm, the kind of calm that destroys people quietly. "The executive who signed final oversight on this project," she said, "was Robert. He bears responsibility." I still remember the feeling, like the floor had been pulled out from under me. I looked around the table. Faces that once smiled, shook my hand, now stared at their notebooks. Only Margaret looked straight ahead, expressionless, untouchable. After the meeting, I stayed behind. She walked over. "If you take responsibility," she whispered, "the company survives. If you don't, the entire family goes down." I asked her quietly, "And if I do, what happens to me?" She didn't answer, just said, "You'll do the right thing. You always do." That night, I sat alone in my office. 2 papers on the desk. One, a formal acceptance of legal responsibility. The other, a divorce petition, both waiting for my signature. Outside the glass door, Derek stood. I could see his reflection in the pane, his eyes searching. "Mom said you messed up. Is it true?" I didn't answer. I just smiled. The weakest smile I've ever worn. "Some mistakes, son. You don't understand until you're forced to choose between honor and love." He frowned. "I don't care about honor. I just want the truth." "You'll learn," I said quietly, "that sometimes the truth kills faster than a lie." The next morning, I signed both papers. When the pen hit the page, I heard something break. Not trust, not hope, something deeper. The spine of a man who once believed he could save everyone. Within days, I handed my admission to the board. By the end of the week, the state licensing board sent my suspension notice. 10 years banned from any construction or development work. I walked out of the company I had built, under a storm of flashbulbs and headlines screaming, "Fraud, betrayal, Ellison's fall." Margaret didn't walk beside me. She stayed upstairs, signing the future without me. Derek watched from the balcony, didn't say a word. I looked up, and in that brief second, I saw the moment he stopped being my son. People think betrayal is an act, but sometimes it's simply someone choosing to stand still while you're falling. Weeks later, Margaret asked to meet. A small cafe on Pearl Street, rain against the windows. She slid a white envelope across the table. "It's the divorce papers," she said. "I've signed. If you sign, our assets separate. The company won't freeze. Derek will be safe." I looked at her. "Have you ever thought that maybe we're killing something other than our reputation?" She looked away, eyes on the rain. Sometimes, someone's happiness has to be paid for by another person's peace. And you've always been the one who could endure. I signed, didn't look back. 2 months later, the papers ran the headline, "EDG saved. Margaret Ellison retains CEO role." And me? I disappeared. Some said I fled the country. Others said I'd been convicted. A few whispered I was dead. No one corrected them. Not even her. A year passed. Then, a postcard arrived. No message, just a picture. Skyline Towers, complete, gleaming under the Denver sky. At the bottom, written in her hand, "We did it, M." I threw it into the fireplace. watched it burn, and thought, yes, we did. Just not together. White light. A gray interrogation room. An investigator sat across from me, tapping a pen. Mr. Ellison, you acknowledge that you signed full legal responsibility for the Skyline project? Yes. You're aware that means you could be charged criminally? I'm aware. Then why did you do it? I looked straight at him. No anger, no fear. Just a silence I'd forged into armor. Because of my family, I said, even the ones who forgot I belonged to it. He studied me for a long moment. I added, quietly, people ask if I regret it. No, because sometimes, to protect what's right, you have to be willing to become the villain in your own story. The light faded to gray. The sound of rain drifted further away. On screen, a single line appeared. Cold, clean, absolute. 2010. The day silence began. Some truths don't arrive with an explosion. They come with the sound of paper, unfolding slowly, quietly. And still, they change everything. Present day, Denver. It was still raining. The air inside the Grant and Myers conference room was so heavy you could hear every breath. White light spilled through the glass walls, blurred by rain streaks running down from the outside. Thomas Grant sat at the head of the table, his hand resting on a red-sealed envelope. Across from him, Derek stood stiff, his face locked tight, like a mask cracking under pressure. Lena reached for his hand. He pulled away. I looked at that envelope, and something inside me twisted. The memory of another one, 14 years ago. Back then, I was the one signing my own guilt. Today, I just waited for the truth to sign mine. Thomas broke the seal. His voice was calm, steady, deliberate. The kind of voice used to read verdicts, not words. Addendum to the last will and testament of Margaret Ellison. Signed April 8th, 2024, in Aspen, Colorado. 2 witnesses, Karen Holt, private nurse, and Michael Reed, state notary. A physician's certification confirms full mental and legal competence. Each word dropped like a stone into cold water, sending ripples, slow and quiet, across the room. Derek folded his arms, pretending calm. But his eyes betrayed him. Thomas placed a small silver USB drive on the table. Mrs. Ellison requested this video be played simultaneously with the reading of the addendum. Evan stepped forward, inserted it into the monitor. The lights dimmed. Static. Then her voice. Margaret Ellison. Not the CEO. Not the Iron Woman who commanded headlines. Just a woman, sitting in a warm wooden room in Aspen, sunlight cutting through the blinds, silver hair catching the light. An oxygen tank sat beside her. A thin tube ran along her cheek. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. Derek, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. There's something I never had the courage to say in front of your father. You've been living in a lie. The room froze. Even the rain seemed to stop. In 2010, it wasn't your father who betrayed me. He signed every paper to take the blame, to keep me out of prison. I let him carry that guilt. I rebuilt this empire on his silence. And for years, I raised you to believe the opposite. I was wrong. Her voice cracked. Then she lifted her eyes, directly into the camera. They shimmered with tears, but not shame, only the kind of truth that comes too late. If I've learned anything after a lifetime of power, it's that no authority on earth can buy forgiveness. All I can do now is give everything back to the one man who never asked for it. Derek stood frozen. Evan looked down. Lena's chair creaked as she backed away, trembling. Thomas said nothing. No one did. The only sound was their breath, the kind that comes when people realize the story they've lived in is about to collapse. Margaret looked down at the document before her. Sunlight brushed her face. Soft, human, unguarded. I, Margaret Ellison, hereby transfer all property, shares, and trust accounts, owned under my name, to Robert Ellison, executor of the estate, and to my son, Derek Ellison, 15 US dollars, the same gift he once offered his father. 1 second. 2. Then silence so deep, it swallowed the rain. The camera caught every reaction. Derek's face drained of color, then flushed red, then pale again. His hands clenched so hard, blood beaded at his knuckles. Lena whispered, "This can't be real." Thomas's tone didn't waver. Every file has been authenticated by the state registry, with live witnesses and original seals. If anyone wishes to verify, the originals are here. Derek looked from Thomas to me. eyes wide, desperate, searching for something to hold on to. But I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't offer my hand. I only looked at him, not with anger, not pity, just the truth cold and solid as steel. They say truth is light, but they forget. To cast light, something must burn. Thomas closed the folder, his voice slow, deliberate. That concludes the addendum. It was signed before 2 witnesses and fully recorded. No one moved. Lena withdrew her hand from Derek's. Evan avoided my eyes. Derek's voice rasped, raw and hollow. She was coerced. Someone made her do this. She would never, never choose you. You destroyed this family, Thomas answered quietly, his tone cold, surgical. No one forces the dying to speak. You just don't believe her, because you never listened. Shut up! Derek roared. All of you. This is staged. The chair toppled. Papers flew. A glass shattered, water spilling across the floor, dark like blood under the lights. The camera kept rolling. Its red light blinked, relentless. I stayed seated, watched him, the same way I once watched myself collapse under a spotlight years ago. Thomas bent down, gently blotting the wet pages with a napkin. Then he spoke softly, but each word sharp enough to cut air. Justice isn't late, Derek. It just waits for the right person to arrive. Silence. Only the rain came back, steady and cold. Derek sank into his chair, hands trembling, eyes empty. No one offered comfort. There was none left to give. On the screen, Margaret's image froze, her eyes open, lips quivering slightly, and the sunlight behind her made her look almost as if she were smiling. Derek bowed his head, face buried in his hands. Thomas removed the USB from the port. The soft click echoed like a closing door. I sat still. Light glinted off the table in front of me. Cold, unmoving. Justice doesn't arrive with shouting. It comes with paper unfolding, and the eyes of the one who finally dares to look at the truth. Outside, the glass wall caught the faint reflection of words in the corner of the screen. Aspen, the 8th of April, 2024. The day the silence ended. There are moments when silence is the loudest explosion of all. In that room, after the screen went dark, I realized everything that had been built on money, pride, and lies had just collapsed in a single breath. The frozen image of Margaret's face still glowed faintly on the monitor, that half smile lingering as if she were still watching all of us. Watching him, no one moved. The rain outside tapped lightly but endlessly, like it was counting down the seconds of a life that had just ended, and another about to begin. Evan stood first. No words. He gathered the papers into his briefcase with pale, shaking hands. As he passed Derek, he muttered under his breath, quietly enough for the camera to still catch it. Should have quit earlier. The door closed softly behind him, but the sound of the hinge, it was like a gunshot. Lena remained seated, her back rigid, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She looked at Derek for a long time, eyes cold, not angry, just empty. The kind of look people give when belief finally turns into disgust. You're on your own, she said quietly. 3 words, sharp as a knife sliding through pride. She stood, grabbed her bag, and walked out. Her heels echoed through the hallway. Steady, precise, then silence. The door slammed shut, and silence returned. Complete, suffocating. Only 3 of us remained. Thomas, Derek, and me. The smell of cold coffee, wet paper, and iron carried through the air. The smell of endings. Derek turned to me, voice hoarse. You think you've won, don't you? He leaned forward, hands on the table, eyes bloodshot. You took advantage of my mother when she was dying. You manipulated her, stole the company back. You're the lowest kind of man I've ever known. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, not the man in front of me, but the boy I once taught to weld, who once asked me, at 12 years old, Dad, why do people call steel the metal with a soul? And I'd said, because steel only becomes strong after it's been burned past its limit. I exhaled. You just proved you still don't understand the answer. Derek slammed his palm on the table. Always the same, always acting like you're above everyone else. He snatched the envelope off the table and threw it to the floor. Papers scattered, white sheets swirling in the air like a blizzard of broken pride. I'll sue. My mother was sick. This was coercion. Thomas hadn't moved the entire time. Now, he calmly opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file with a red state seal, and laid it flat on the table. His tone was steady, cold and deliberate. Medical records of Margaret Ellison, signed by Dr. Susan Blake, Aspen Memorial Hospital. Diagnosis: full mental capacity and sound judgment. At the time of signing the will, he flipped to the final page, slid it across to Derek. And here the no contest clause. If you contest the will, you forfeit your inheritance, all $15 of it. The room went still. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Derek just stood there, eyes wide, mouth trembling, as if the air itself had been stolen from him. Then he laughed. It came out broken, jagged, half laughter, half collapse. $15? After everything I did? For her. For this company. I'm worth $15? Thomas replied softly. No, Derek. You're worth more. But she only paid you what was left. After subtracting greed, Derek shouted, voice cracking. Don't you lecture me. He hurled the chair aside and lunged toward the table. 2 security guards rushed in from the door, grabbing him before he reached Thomas. The floor echoed with scuffling shoes, ragged breathing, the chaos of pride dying in real time. A journalist, still filming from the corner, raised his camera again. The red light blinked on. The lens caught everything. Derek Ellison, heir to $200 million, screaming and struggling between 2 guards. Thomas stood, carefully collecting the papers scattered across the floor. He straightened them, his tone flat but final. Mrs. Ellison told me, if her son ever attacked anyone during this reading, to keep it as final proof that Robert had been telling the truth. Derek froze. Breathing stopped mid-chest, and in his eyes, I saw it. The dimming of a man's soul when he realizes he has nothing left to hold on to. People can hide their sins behind words, but not their soul. When the truth finally shines on it, the guards let go. Derek sank into his chair, head in his hands, eyes hollow. Lena, even his mother, all gone. Only the rain remained, steady, cold, washing something unseen away. Thomas closed the folder, aligning every page neatly. The session is concluded, he said. Per the will, the assets will transfer to the executor within 30 days. He looked at me, a mix of relief and sorrow in his eyes. Margaret chose well. I shook my head slightly. No, she just chose the one who still knew how to forgive. I stood, put on my coat, buttoned it slowly, every motion deliberate. Derek lifted his head, voice cracking into a growl. You haven't won. I'll get it all back. I swear I will. I stopped at the door, didn't turn around. You can't reclaim what was never yours to begin with. I walked out. The hallway was long and sterile. White lights reflected off the polished marble floors. Each step echoed like a metronome, marking the distance between my past and my peace. Along the walls, black and white photos of old Denver, buildings I once designed, sketches I once drew, now just artifacts of a younger man who believed in permanence. Outside, rain thickened against the glass. The city shimmered below, traffic lights bleeding red across the puddled streets. A reporter hurried beside me, microphone raised. Mr. Ellison, do you have a statement for the public about inheriting your late wife's estate? I stopped, looked through the glass, past the buildings, toward the faint shadow of the Rockies hidden in mist. My voice came out low, calm, deliberate. No one truly inherits justice. We only hold it, until we find the courage to give it back. Then I walked on. The glass doors slid open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and steel. Inside, Derek sat hunched in the empty room, papers scattered around him, the ceiling light reflecting off a shallow pool of spilled water, warped, distorted, like his name, his legacy, his reflection. Thomas stood by the window, watching the rain fall, his face heavy, like a man who'd just finished a moral trial. And me. I walked out into the storm, my silhouette dissolving into the rain, the red-sealed envelope still in my hand. Justice doesn't come in sunlight. It comes in rain, when no one's trying to wash their hands anymore. They say justice always arrives on time. I don't believe that. Justice is usually late. But when it comes, everything left standing bows its head. The next morning, Denver was gray and damp, the sky heavy as cooling steel. I brewed coffee and sat in my garage, watching an old television flicker in the corner. Every channel carried the same headline, a story no one could look away from. On screen, a banner scrolled across the bottom. Ex-husband inherits $200 million after wife's confession. Beneath it, a still frame of me leaving the Grant and Myers building. Soaked in rain, silent, eyes down. The anchor's voice filled the room. After nearly 15 years branded a traitor, engineer Robert Ellison, 63, has been confirmed as the legal heir to the late CEO Margaret Ellison's entire estate, valued at approximately $200 million. The newscaster paused, a practiced silence before the next blow. Sources confirm that on the same day the will was read, federal authorities executed an arrest warrant for Evan Brooks, former legal counsel of EDG, on charges of investment fraud and falsifying Skyline project records from 2010. I watched as the footage rolled. Evan, handcuffed, head bowed. No arrogance left. Just a man soaked by rain and ruin, walking out of the same doors he once guarded. Justice isn't late because it gets lost. It's late because it chooses to walk past the ones who ran too fast. Then came Thomas Grant, appearing live in a morning interview. Behind him, shelves of law books and soft amber light. His tone was calm, deliberate, the kind of voice that carried both grief and relief. Before her death, he said, Margaret Ellison submitted complete documentation of the Skyline Towers case to federal investigators. She knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. She didn't just leave behind wealth, she left behind justice. The reporter leaned forward. Do you believe Robert Ellison will forgive them all? Thomas looked down at his teacup, then answered quietly. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's simply how a person chooses not to die with their hatred. I turned off the TV, sat still. The rain tapped softly on the metal roof of the garage. Above me, the model airplanes I'd built hung motionless, their small wooden wings swaying slightly, like memories that no longer wanted to fly. I thought of Margaret's voice in that video. I built my empire on his silence, a sentence that sounded like both confession and epitaph. I once thought I'd lost everything, but now that justice had come, I felt empty. Because justice, like winter, doesn't arrive to comfort. It arrives to cleanse. Around noon, Thomas showed up. No cameras, no suits. Just him holding a thick envelope. On the front, in faded handwriting, for Robert, personal. He didn't speak right away. We sat side by side on the old wooden bench, surrounded by dust, paint, and memory. He glanced around the cluttered space. You kept all this? I need it, I said, to remember who I was before the noise. He nodded slowly. Margaret used to say the same thing, only she remembered through numbers. I smiled faintly, opened the envelope. No money, no legal papers, just a small brass key. Heavy, cold, etched with a single word. Legacy. The metal's chill ran through my palm. What is this? I asked. Thomas looked at me, voice low. She left it with a letter to me, said that if justice ever came back to you, I should give you this. He paused, then added softly. She said, if Robert ever receives this key, it means I trust he won't use truth for revenge, but for closure. I didn't speak, didn't move. The key caught the afternoon light, the word legacy glinting, as if forged from everything we'd lost. Thomas rose to leave. He gave a small nod, the kind men share when words would only cheapen the moment. And then I was alone again, surrounded by the relics of a life rebuilt from ashes, old blueprints, wooden frames, and a family photo I hadn't looked at in years. People mistake victory for absolution. I didn't win anything. I just lived long enough to see if justice remembered the way home. I set the key down on the workbench. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching on the brass letters. Outside, I heard the neighbor's TV. FBI confirms that Evan Brooks confessed to falsifying the 2010 Skyline financial records. Under pressure from senior leadership, no evidence implicates Robert Ellison. One sentence. 15 years of waiting. One line. And the weight of an entire life lifted. Then my phone buzzed. Private number. I hesitated. Picked it up. At first, silence. Then breathing. Una ven. Familiar. A young man's voice, trembling. Dad, it's me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Derek. His voice cracked through static and regret. I don't know where to start. I replied, quietly. Then don't start. Just know where to stop. He said nothing for a long time. Then the line cut. Silence. The screen went dark. I sat there, alone again. The key glowed faintly on the table. The word legacy, burning gold in the afternoon sun. The camera in my mind panned slowly. Across the garage, over the sketches of Skyline Tower, the little model of the building that ruined and rebuilt my life. Justice isn't wrong for being late. It just wants to see if you still have the patience to wait for it. And sometimes, the reward isn't money. It's hearing someone call you Dad one last time. The lens stopped on the brass key. Legacy, carved deep. Outside the garage, the wind carried the scent of rain and iron, the smell of truth when it finally unlocks what's been closed for too long. They say that when justice is served, the world feels lighter, but no one ever mentions justice has a smell. The smell of iron, of old paper, of memories unlocked after being sealed away for too long. That afternoon, I drove toward Cherry Creek, past streets that once carried my name on billboards. The traffic lights blinked red against the rain-damp asphalt, reflected in puddles like blood diluted with time. The city looked the same, but I wasn't the same man who once built it. I parked across from the old Ellison Development Group headquarters. Tall, proud, its mirrored windows still pretending to hold the sky. But the sign on the rooftop, EDG, had rusted through. The letters cracked like broken promises. 14 years had passed since I last stepped through those doors. And yet, as I walked up the marble steps, I could still hear the echo of my younger self. The footsteps of ambition, the laughter before the fall. At the entrance, the security guard squinted. He was older now. Gray hair, trembling hands, the kind of man time had taught to keep quiet. "Mr. Ellison," he said softly. "Been a long time." I nodded. "It has. I'm just here to pick up something I left behind." He didn't ask what. He simply smiled, that sad, knowing smile of someone who's seen men return only when there's nothing left to lose. 17th floor. The elevator doors opened with a hiss. The scent hit me immediately. Polished oak and cold steel. The perfume of wealth, of boardrooms where people shake hands while sharpening knives behind their backs. The room looked untouched. The glass wall still offered a panoramic view of Denver, the city Margaret and I once promised to conquer. Her desk was immaculate. Not a speck of dust, not a paper out of place. It was eerie, like she had just stepped out for a meeting and might walk back in at any moment. But she wouldn't. On the far wall hung that old framed painting of downtown Denver, a gift I'd once given her after our first successful project. She called it The Dream of the Ellisons. I ran my hand along the edge of the frame. It felt loose. When I pulled slightly, the frame shifted, revealing a thin strip of metal behind it. Hidden, waiting, a wall safe. Its paint chipped, its brass handle worn smooth by time. No keypad, no code. Just a keyhole shaped for something ancient. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small brass key Thomas had given me, the one engraved with a single word: legacy. The metal caught a fragment of afternoon sun, casting a faint golden glow across the wall. For a long moment, I simply stood there, my hand on the key, my breath steady. Then I turned it. Click. A sound so small, and yet, inside my chest, it felt like thunder. The safe door swung open slowly, hinges whispering like an old confession finally spoken aloud. Inside were three things. Only three. A silver USB drive, scratched but intact. A leather folder tied with faded string. And a cream-colored envelope, handwritten, Robert. Nothing else. No gold. No cash. No contracts. Just the weight of the truth. I sat down at her desk, the same one where she had once sat across from me, eyes bright with dreams and ruthlessness in equal measure. I opened the envelope carefully, afraid the paper might crumble if handled too roughly. The ink was fading, but her handwriting, tilted, elegant, still carried that unshakable confidence. Her voice came alive inside my head, fragile but unmistakably hers. "Robert, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Maybe you don't need to hear an apology anymore, but I still need to say it. You carried my guilt. You let the world crucify your name so that I could rebuild mine. I built my empire on your silence, and I lived inside the shadow of that silence ever since. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but if there's another life after this, I hope I'll find the courage to rebuild not from your silence, but beside it." Her voice cracked then, the kind of tremor that comes when a person finally stops pretending. I used to think honor was the highest thing a person could keep, but I learned honor doesn't live in buildings or bank accounts. It lives in the way we face the people we buried beneath our ambition. I'm leaving you this USB. Inside it are all the documents, The Skyline files, the testimonies, the contract I signed wrong. You don't need to make them public. I just want you to know the truth never died. It only waited for you to return, so it could see the light again. I sat there, still as stone. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass. The sunlight shifted, turning the ink on the letter into a living shimmer, like her words were breathing one last time. I didn't cry, not because I'd run out of tears, but because what she gave me wasn't sadness. It was closure. For 15 years, I'd thought I'd lost everything, but now, holding that letter, I realized I hadn't lost it. It had been waiting for me here, inside this locked room, inside her last honest breath. Beneath my letter lay another envelope. Derek, still sealed. The handwriting the same, gentle, almost maternal. On the back, a single line. For our son, if he still wants to know who his mother really was. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers brushed the seal. Part of me wanted to tear it open, to read what she couldn't tell him while alive. But I didn't, because forgiveness isn't curiosity. It's restraint. Some truths don't need an audience. They just need a witness. I placed the envelope back inside the safe, along with the leather folder. Then I looked inside one last time. The metal's reflection caught my face. Older, lined, but steady. For the first time in years, I looked like myself again. I closed the door, turned the key. Click. A final punctuation mark at the end of a 15-year sentence. They say forgiveness unlocks others. But sometimes, to forgive, you have to lock part of yourself away again. As I stepped into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of the Denver skyline through the window. The sunset spread like spilled copper across the glass, turning the city gold. For years, I'd seen Denver as a battlefield. Contracts, betrayals, deals sealed with lies. But from here, bathed in the soft light of evening, it looked different. It looked human. Behind me, the safe was shut, the key warm in my palm. The old security guard was waiting near the elevator. He looked at me the way people look at returning ghosts. "Did you find what you came for, Mr. Ellison?" "Yes," I said. What I came for wasn't a thing. It was a voice. He nodded, smiling faintly. "She always said you'd come back one day." Maybe she was right. "She usually was," he replied, his eyes kind. Outside, wind swept across the parking lot, carrying the scent of rain and iron. I held Margaret's letter tightly. The paper was thin, fragile, but somehow warm, like the words inside it were still alive. The last light of day spilled over the envelope, and for a moment, the name Robert gleamed gold. In a lifetime, there are two things you should never lock away: truth and kindness. Everything else, time can take care of. In his hand, Margaret's letter, soft but heavy as metal. Forgiveness doesn't make me forget. It just makes me strong enough to look back without shaking. They say that after every storm comes peace. But I've learned true peace only arrives when you stop trying to prove who was right and who was wrong. 3 months had passed since the safe at Cherry Creek was opened. Summer came late to Denver that year. Slow, hesitant, as if the city itself was learning how to breathe again. After a 15-year explosion, the news about the Ellison family had finally quieted. But silence, I found, isn't the same as forgetting. On the front page of the Denver Business Journal, a headline in bold black letters: EDG board removes Derek Ellison amid audit scandal. Below it, a photograph. Derek leaving the company building, his suit wrinkled, tie undone, eyes lowered, expression blank. The article read, "Following an internal investigation, the EDG board confirms that Derek Ellison deliberately concealed financial evidence during the company's 2021-2023 restructuring period. His personal shares remain frozen, pending federal prosecution." I stared at that picture. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel anger. Just fatigue. The kind of tired that settles in after walking too far for too long and finally realizing the destination was never about winning. It was about stopping. Evan Brooks was sentenced to 5 years in prison for investment fraud. During his hearing, he stood pale and hollow, eyes downcast, and said quietly, "If I'd told the truth from the start, maybe fewer people would have had to carry someone else's sins." And Lena Hart vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no social media, no sightings. Only a rumor. She'd left Denver, moved to Portland, and opened a small cafe with no sign, no website, no name. Perhaps silence was her own punishment. I didn't attend any of their trials, didn't talk to reporters, didn't give interviews. The only thing I sent out was a single handwritten note to Carol Myers, the neighbor who'd brought me apple pie. The morning I left Boulder, it read, "Justice comes late, but when it arrives, it doesn't need noise." 3 days later, a reply came in a small white envelope. Same slanted handwriting, same calm tone. Sometimes the silent ones win, simply by not needing to. I read that letter sitting on the garage steps. The evening wind drifted through the half-open door, carrying the scent of rain and pine sap. Above me, the model airplanes swayed gently from the rafters, their tiny shadows sliding across the ceiling, like memories refusing to land. And for the first time, I understood. For years, I hadn't been fighting to win. I'd been fighting to hear my own voice again, the one buried beneath contracts, in silence, and misunderstood love. One morning in late August, I drove west, up into the mountains, to the place Margaret had chosen as her final resting site. Beside it lay Silverleaf Lake, clear enough to mirror the sky, until you couldn't tell where clouds ended, and the world began. I brought with me the silver USB, the one she'd left behind in the safe. Inside it, every testimony, every signature, every mistake, evidence strong enough to destroy the rest of the people who'd helped her hide the truth. But I hadn't come here for revenge. The air grew thin as the road climbed. Pine trees lined both sides, their scent sharp as memory. The lake appeared like a sheet of glass, still, cold, infinite. I parked by the shore. The air was crisp, a mix of dried pine needles and damp iron from last night's rain. I opened my old laptop, plugged in the USB. The screen flickered once, then came to life. A video began to play automatically. Her face appeared. Margaret, not the CEO. Not the woman who had stood above headlines and empires, but the woman I once knew, hair gray and loose, eyes fragile yet clear. Behind her, a window opened onto a mountain view, the same one now standing in front of me. Her voice was faint, but steady. "If you're watching this, it means you've forgiven me." She smiled weakly, a tired smile, but real. "I didn't make this for the world. I made it for you. The only person who understands that truth doesn't need an audience." A pause. Then her eyes lifted, directly into the camera. "If you choose forgiveness, keep the truth. Don't burn it. Because sometimes, silence is the only way. Justice can outlive us." The screen faded to black. The reflection of my own face stared back at me. Older, lined, but calmer than ever. I held the USB in my hand. Small, light, yet heavy, as if it carried the entire weight of my past. I pulled out my lighter. A tiny flame flared, trembling in the mountain wind. For a moment, I wanted to drop the USB into the fire. Watch it melt, watch it vanish, watch everything end. But I didn't. I flicked the lighter shut. No, justice doesn't need to burn. To prove it's real, it only needs to rest. I walked to the water's edge. The surface was perfectly still, like glass holding its breath. The mountains stood behind me, silent witnesses. I looked down, into the reflection of the sky, the clouds, and my own face. And somewhere, faintly, I could almost see hers, not as she was, but as she might be now, weightless, at peace. I opened my hand. The USB slipped from my fingers, cutting a clean arc through the air. It hit the water with a soft plop, then sank slowly, silver fading into blue. Down there, somewhere beneath the surface, the truth finally found a quiet place to rest. People think forgiveness means letting go, but forgiveness is the most courageous act of all, because it asks you to keep living, even when your heart still bleeds. I sat there for a long while. The sun broke through the clouds, thin rays spilling across the lake, turning the surface into liquid glass. Dragonflies hovered, their wings catching the light, like flickers of memory refusing to fade. I could hear the low hum of the wind through the pines. It sounded almost like breathing. I whispered, barely audible, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I need the quiet." The lake still as a mirror, reflecting the pure, endless sky. The silver USB sinking slowly, a faint glint disappearing beneath ripples. I sit on the shore, hands resting on my knees, eyes closed, the sunlight painting my shoulders gold. The Rockies stand in silence, vast and eternal, guardians of a man who finally learned to let go. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply quiets the present, long enough for you to hear yourself again. The light dimmed gradually, turning gold into dusk. The sky deepened to the color of memory, and as the wind moved over the lake, soft and rhythmic, it sounded almost like peace itself, whispering through the world, saying, "Rest." Autumn came early that year. Boulder was wrapped in gold, like a warm blanket pulled over the city. After a long, uneasy sleep, the air smelled of pine and dry soil, that mountain scent you can almost taste, the smell of beginnings disguised as endings. I moved back into my old garage, the one that used to be a workshop, for building model airplanes. It looked different now. No more stains on the walls, no sharp tang of metal, just the hum of small engines, the laughter of neighborhood kids, learning how to sand wings, glue joints, and balance a propeller on a string. I stood by the workbench watching them, their small, serious faces bent over tiny wooden parts. It felt like watching a younger version of myself, learning how to believe again. One boy looked up and asked, "Mr. Ellison, why do planes fly?" I smiled. "Because they learn how to stay balanced between the wind and gravity," I said. "Just like people, you can only fly if you know how to let go, just enough to be lifted." They didn't really understand, but they laughed. And somehow that was enough. For the first time in years, my heart felt light, like a balsa wing in the afternoon sun. Later that day, Carol Myers came by. Same wool coat, same basket of apple pie. She placed it on the table and said softly, "This time, I didn't bake for a man who lost. I baked for one who finally knew when to stop." I chuckled. "You still have a way of saying things that keep people thinking for days." "That's how I know you're still alive," she replied. We sat on the porch outside the garage, watching the pale blue sky and a single airplane cutting across it, leaving a white trail behind, like a line drawn across time. Neither of us said a word. We just watched until it vanished behind the ridge. Honor doesn't need paperwork. It just needs someone left who still believes it's worth keeping. Back inside, the unfinished model of Skyline Tower sat on the workbench, a miniature of the project that had once destroyed my life. This time, there were no investors, no board, no deadlines, just wood, glue, and a few small hands, learning how to build something stronger than money. The smell of sawdust and apple pie filled the room. For once, it didn't smell like loss. Then the phone rang. "Thomas Grant," I answered. His voice, always steady, sounded softer than usual. "Robert, I just received confirmation from the probate court. The Ellison and Legacy Foundation has been approved." I said nothing, just listened. All of it, the $200 million, has been transferred to the foundation. It will fund scholarships for engineering students who can't afford their education. The first award is already named, just like you asked, the Skyline Award. I leaned back in my chair, looking toward the window, where afternoon light spilled through. Dust motes floated in the air, like fragments of old dreams. Finally, at rest. My voice was low but calm. Maybe silence, after all, can make its own kind of sound. Thomas chuckled quietly. "Not everyone will understand that, Robert. They don't have to," I said. "It's enough that it stays long enough for someone else to hear it someday." After the call, I stayed in the workshop. The kids had gone home. Only the wind slipped through the half-open door. On the table, the Skyline model stood half-finished, its glue not yet dry. I picked up a pencil and wrote on the wooden base, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what stays true when everything else fades." I pinned the note to the wall above the model. For the first time in years, I smiled, not out of pride, but peace. Justice comes slow. Forgiveness comes later. But honor, when guarded by silence, always arrives right on time. Evening settled over Boulder. Carol came back, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You know," she said, "you remind me of the kites. I used to fly with my husband when we were young. They'd soar so high, but they always knew when to come back down." I smiled. Maybe that's because I've fallen enough times to know that flying too long is just another way of falling. She laughed softly. The sound blended with the wind and the scent of baked apples and pine. That smell, the smell of being alive. The sun dipped behind the Rockies. Boulder glowed with the last light of day, soft gold, fading to amber. I stepped out onto the porch. Above me, Another airplane crossed the sky. Slow, deliberate, its contrail curving like a question mark against the darkening blue. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. Maybe everything we lose is just finding its way back, in a different form. Legacy isn't in wealth or in names. It's in how you choose to end the story, quietly, but without regret. If it were you, could you forgive the child who once took everything from you? Tell me in the comments. I'll read everyone. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe justice doesn't need noise to be heard.